Welcome to Ink and Flame. I'm your host, Tina Koutras, and today we're sitting down with Lisa Tirreno, and she's going to talk to us about her book, The Prince of Fortune. Hi, Lisa. How are you? Where are you coming to us from?
I'm in Melbourne, in Australia, so far, far away.
Yeah, so it's pretty early for you, I guess, is
It's
it?
8 a.m. here. Yeah, you can see
8 a.m.
the day starting in the window behind me.
Yeah, I've got my dragon hiding my window, so it's getting darker here while you're getting lighter. So we're going to chat about your Prince of Fortune. And before we do, let's talk a little bit about you. You describe yourself as a recovering journalist. How did your time in journalism shape your writing style?
I think it actually hindered it because I don't think I really got at the start that journalism is like the opposite of fiction writing. And I don't just mean because you're making it up. Like in journalism, you have to sort of do the who, what, where, when, why, how, which immediately. Like you can't bury the lead and you need to do it in as few words as possible, as efficiently as possible. Writing fiction is the opposite of that. You need to keep people reading, keeping them, wondering, well, but what's going to happen, and what does that mean? And wait, what is the deep, dark secret? Whereas in journalism, that would be in the first line. That'd be in the heading. So yeah, once I worked that out, it made everything much easier. But I think where it helped was that I was familiar with the editing process. I was familiar with, I brought a sensible grounding in grammar. So I think that there were a few things that helped with. I was familiar with pitching. So like when it came to actually being published, that made it easier. But the writing, it did not help at all.
So I would think that your research would benefit you with making sure your planning aspect of your story was pretty in depth.
Yes, but I mean, the other thing with that is that it is the scale of a book just throws everything out. Like it's one thing, okay, so I need to research this topic for a 500-word article. But if you research like a particular technology from like the 18th century or a particular battle from the Napoleonic War or something like that, that is just going in one section, that is still something that will impact 3,000 words. But often what you need is vibes, not facts. If you try and stick a million facts in your book, it's going to be terrible. So
Yeah.
I think that it is different. And I often early on was tripped up by that because I was like, oh, well, I'll just put all this in. And I'm like, this is terrible. Like, why did you do this? So yeah, no, I think it tripped me up a few times.
That's
Yeah.
hilarious. So what was the moment that you knew you wanted to write The Prince of Fortune?
I had the very, very first kernel of an idea for the book. In a dream. It sounds ridiculous. It sounds like it's such a cliche, but I had this dream of these two young men and they were chasing each other around a night market and they, were having a great time, but, one of them was really worried he wasn't supposed to be there but he was really happy to be there with the other boy. And the other boy was all, let's go here, was all excited and cheeky and ready for anything. And they were both just really happy to be there with each other. And, I kind of went, when I woke up, oh my God, I have to write this down. And I want to know what happens next. So, yeah, that was the beginning of it. And that scene in the night market, I mean, a version of it, not exactly what it was in my head, but that scene did make it into the final book. I was so happy I got to keep it.
So cool. So, how has your background in English and literature influenced your approach to writing?
I think that you need to read widely to be able to write creatively. Like I think that you do need to, have read a lot and to have thought about the things that like a degree in that makes you think about. So you have to think about things. You have to think about the history of that particular literary movement. You have to think about all of this kind of stuff. And in terms of studying history, I think studying history makes it real easy to imagine other times and places. So yeah, no, it helped a lot, much more than my journalism.
That's cool. What's been the most surprising or rewarding part of transitioning from journalism to fiction?
The surprising part was the difference in the industries. Like, they're so nice in publishing. Like, nobody shouted at me once. And like, but the deadlines are so much longer and everything's very slow. And like, whereas when I worked, like my first job in media, we were working on dailies. And so sometimes you had half an hour to turn a page around. Like, it was bonkers. And so it was very hectic and there was a lot of shouting. And I didn't experience any of that in publishing. They're very, very nice. Always have their manners on.
It's awesome. So the world of Prince of Fortune feels very alive. What inspired its creation, aside from your dream?
It's a fantasy version of kind of the late Georgian era. I'm always a bit reluctant to use the term regency because I had to move things around. Like, because there's no colonialism, that completely changed England's history. So there's no stolen wealth from, the colonies, which means that I kind of had to sit down and go, all right, well, if there's no stolen wealth, then that means that the Industrial Revolution would probably have been a bit later. So that's a bit slower. They're just not as wealthy in general. So even though it is the class system is massive, that is the main way that people are in hierarchies, but it is not as massively, like, it started doing this between the rich and the poor after the Industrial Revolution, and like that hasn't quite happened. So yeah, I had to base it on what I guessed would happen because of what I changed. There's no religion. And so I kind of went, that would probably mean that medicine and science was a bit more advanced because you're not just saying, oh, well, it's God's will all the time. So like there were a few things like that I ended up tweaking. So yeah, I am reluctant to say Regency. Late Georgian era kind of gets you there. Yeah.
I think that's amazing. I love the way you threaded that together, that, because there's no religion, that science would be like, I find that fascinating. I think that's really cool. What a great idea.
But
So
these things
were there,
change so much. Yeah. Yeah. Because they shape thought. They shape what you're thinking about. Yeah.
yeah, were there specific myths, cultures, or historical periods? I guess you kind of covered the historical period, but myths and cultures that you kind of went at?
Oh, it's blatantly based on England. So, like, I don't think that I was subtle there. So, yeah. So, there's a map. Actually, why don't I flash the map? That will help illustrate what I'm talking about. I started with sort of Europe, and then I had to kind of work out how my geography would work. So, if we've got England, and this section has broken off and become its own sort of country, but then you've got sort of this area is kind of based on a lot of European cultures, and up here we've got like Norway and Sweden-ish cultures. Like, I don't think I've been subtle with that because like that's just what I needed. So yeah, no, it's definitely based on Europe, except I mean the thing with that is that in the late 1700s everywhere was not like England, in that like Spain was still having the Spanish Inquisition. Italy wasn't reunified yet. Europe was going through a lot at the time.
Yeah.
Whereas because England had been so stable for ages, it was able to lead the charge with the Industrial Revolution. It was able to kind of focus on, manners and fashion and, building factories and scientific discovery and stuff. And they were big on pushing that as signs of how civilized they were. And I kind of ended up having to go, okay, well, I need to extend that to the whole continent. And part of the way that that was possible was because no one is allowed to fight. They are all locked in an ironclad peace treaty that they've had since a massive continental war 500 years earlier. Because the other thing that I was thinking about was, what if over that period, like after the sort of maybe, what if they hadn't all decided that they needed to compete for resources and they needed to run off and invade other countries for resources so they could continue fighting each other? What if instead they were just locked into a commitment to peace that would create enormous stability, and they could focus on culture, they could focus on all the things that really stable countries do? And so then no one is fighting for reunification of their countries because the borders are not allowed to change. They are set in stone. Nobody is having the Spanish Inquisition. There's no religion. So I kind of ended up having to take what decisions I'd made about the world and stamp them over Europe. And wouldn't it have been wonderful if there hadn't have been, colonization? It would have been wonderful if the Spanish Inquisition hadn't ground Spain into struggling Wouldn't it have been wonderful if Italy had been allowed to run itself for all those hundreds of years? Like, it just is really interesting to think about. What if they hadn't all been at each other's throats and fighting over resources, but instead working together and just focusing on trade and making nice things and having a nice time and not going to war all the time? Like, that would have been great.
Sounds like a positive dream come true.
Yeah, yeah.
So how do you approach creating a fantasy world that feels both magical but has all these grounded elements into it?
Think that detail makes things real. I mean, there's that, but also giving things a history really helps to make them feel real. So, I mean, if they've had this 500 years of history since this war that happened, all that time ago, and it meant that, they all have particular cultures and that they all try and get along and they all have a commitment to intermarry between the royal families. And well, then the country must be true because it's got all this history. All of the characters have their own families and their own backstories. And again, I think that just giving everything its own history and then seeing the way that characters are informed by that environment, same as seeing the way that the country has been informed with that history, I think that that's a really good way to, like, from a craft perspective, make the word feel real.
Right.
So, yeah, that's what I do.
And is there a magic system inside the novel?
There is.
Yeah.
In Sabin, which is the main country, which is where our two main characters come from, that is where all of the magic is centered. And so they're a bit weird because they're the country with the magic. And because this one country has all of the magic, that's part of what keeps everyone behaving and not going to war with each other. And so I haven't actually said that explicitly, but I assume people get it. Like, they've got this ironclad peace treaty, but part of what enforces it is that this one country, who were mostly responsible for the war 500 years earlier, they are very committed to not doing that again. And so everybody else is a bit like, oh, the country with the weirdos with magic. Yeah, no, we don't want to do that. So their royal family are the ones who have the magical powers, and whoever has the most magic becomes the next king or queen. So it's not a hereditary monarchy, although it is in the family. And part of why I did that, I made it a inherited magic system, is because power is often inherited. Privilege is inherited. It's something that I don't think I was subtle with the metaphor there. Like, it is one of those things where I was like, I don't love the idea of inherited special abilities, because that means that, no one random can be special. But then I was like, no, but the magic is kind of standing in for power. And that is absolutely something that you are often born into.
Yeah.
The other thing that happens is that there are people with the gift of prophecy. So there are seers in this world. And that happens a lot more randomly because it's a much weaker power. And so the elemental magic that the royal family has is, full on stuff that they are very handy in a war situation. That's often what they, end up using it for. They're good in emergencies. When there's, something's happened, if a fire happens, the nearest royal will run and, help you put out the fire with their magic or whatever. They are really good at that kind of thing. But it's the big guns. Whereas the people with prophecy, that tends to be very spread out because, of course, it's just, it pops up here and there because of, you might be very, very distantly related to the royal family and your family will throw up prophets.
Right.
But my main character, Edmund, who is the Prince of Fortune, he has that title because he has the rarest kind of magic, which is almost like a twisted form of the elemental magic that the rest of his family have, where he can control the weather because of the way that his air and water magics work. And he can control plants because of the way that his earth magic works. So like and his, like all of his elemental magic is linked to those particular things. And he is not good in a war situation because, I mean, what's he going to do? He's going to make the grass grow. But he's very, very good at peacetime because he can calm down the weather. He can make it rain. He can make the crops grow. And the royal family only throws up one of these every few hundred years. And the second it was worked out that he was a Prince of Fortune, he was declared as the next king. So he was very young. And he's had all of this pressure on him because as long as he can remember, well, you're going to be the next king. And then prophets started having, these prophecies about him, about what a great king he was going to be. So he's grown up with all of this on his shoulders, and he's not enjoying it at all. He is like being crushed under the weight of all of these expectations. And it's all because of naturally what he is and how that makes people view him, which I think is something that like queer people get stuff dumped on them. They get expectations dumped on them. They get all of this external stuff dumped on them that has nothing to do with them, and particular things are expected of them that again might have nothing to do with them. So that's the magic system in my rambling explanation of it.
No, that's okay. I love it. So do you start with the geography, the culture, or the magic system when you were building your world?
Everything came from the characters. I always start with the characters, and then everything kind of came from that. So I had these two characters, and I was like, okay, look, I want it to be a fantasy story. I want it to be romantic. And I was like, okay, well, capital R romantic period. Great. Perfect. Especially since I was really keen for non-medieval fantasy. And so I was like, okay, well, romantic period then. And we don't have a lot of fantasy kind of set in that kind of period. We have ones that are set in specific bits, like of that sort of period. But I kind of wanted that flavor of that time period, and then everything kind of built from there. And then once you start making specific decisions, such as, well, no, this is like a fantasy version of Europe, except there's been no, colonization, there's been no really, you make those decisions, and then everything kind of builds out. It kind of becomes quite easy because you go, oh, well, I've locked that one in. That's a big decision that will impact these things. So once you start making decisions, I think further decisions are easy. Yeah.
Right. So you had mentioned that the scene that you had dreamed about with the two of them running in the market, the night market, I think you said, that you were really happy that it made it into the book. So was there any parts that you loved that didn't make it into the book?
Yeah, there really were. But spoilers. No. Okay. What did I wish made it in? There was a scene that my editor had asked me to extend, and I made it clear in that scene that Edmund's sister Alicia absolutely knew that the boys liked each other, and she was here for it. Like, she knew what was going on. Like, there was no getting it past her. Like, she was watching them going, yep. And she was like, yep, great, good. But then I extended that too much, and that bit got cut out. It would have been really nice just to, have had that in to make it clear that she was there for it. She was shipping them. But, that got deleted. I don't know. That was just something little and nice that wasn't necessary at all. But yeah, it would have been nice if that made it in.
I get that. So how do you ensure that your world building enhances the story rather than overwhelming it?
I am not sure that I don't overwhelm it. I put in a lot of unnecessary detail and I overdo it. But I think when you're writing it, you just need to put it all in and then you delete it afterwards. And so you have to kind of look at it then in the scene by scene basis and go, this is too much. This is slowing the writing down. This isn't necessary. I don't need this detail. You don't need to know that Alicia's there for it. Like, so there's always a lot of that kind of thing where you're like, they don't need the entire history of this building. Why did I write a page about the history of this building? Delete that. I think they can have 2 sentences. So I think that's something that happens in editing. But I also think you do that in the first drafts because you need to know. So like, I don't think there's a way around it. So, for instance, there's all of this material that I've got in a little file that is about the war that happened 500 years earlier, just because I needed to know. So I needed to know what happened so that I could make unclear what happened, because in the time when the book is set, all the records have been destroyed and no one's really clear on what's happened. And the 2 parts of the country, because a section of the country has broken off and become its own country, they have a completely different version of history of what happened in that war. And I needed to be able to walk that line of which one of them is right and how does that impact the plot. But there was so much information, a lot of it didn't impact the plot. Like, I came up with the whole history of like the royal family at the time. And I was just doing that because I was groping towards what I needed. So sometimes you do a lot of stuff that you don't need to do, but it helps you get to what you do need. And I think
So
that's just my process.
I think I've heard the expression that the first draft is you telling yourself the story. And I
Yeah.
think that's very, very
Yeah.
accurate.
I think that's Terry Pratchett. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
I
it's
think it's a beautiful
100%.
statement.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, do you find yourself drawn to writing certain types of characters, like the heroes or anti-heroes that you have brought to life?
I think it depends on what I'm writing, and what serves the story that I'm trying to tell. This one is definitely a hero-centric story, but I also I made them unlikely heroes. Like I made these two very sweet young men who then get thrust into war because, like, I don't think anyone should be going to war ever. Like, war's horrific. But I wanted to make them seem very unlikely soldiers. But I also made my villains very sort of black-hatted. And I partly did that because even as I was writing it, like I started writing this 5 years ago, but this feels like an age when politically the gloves are off. Like people are being cruel in public. Like they're just going ahead and doing it openly. And I was like, I feel like, particularly for a queer story where people are now just being quite open about hating us, that I should just go ahead and make these villains villainous. And they think they're right. And because they think they're right, they get to just do whatever they want. So that's what I was going for.
And it's very true. When we never realize whether we're good or bad, we're just doing our thing, right? How do you balance giving your characters agency while also exploring themes like fate and fortune?
Yeah. I ended up looking at how this has been done throughout the years, and we have, like, some of our oldest stories have prophecies in them. Like the Iliad has prophecy in it. The Epic of Gilgamesh has prophecy in it. And so I kind of ended up looking at what they did, and universally making the prophecies really vague helps. But also what I think that you need to do is make sure that your characters, their actions are consistent with who they are. You need to make sure that what they're choosing to do, no matter what the prophecy is still just consistent with the character. You don't want to be making them act out of characters. And a lot of the drama of Prince of Fortune stems from my two, because they're very sweet young men, they let people take their power away. They let other people tell them what to do. I think a lot of young people will recognize it when they realize that they need to do specific things that are maybe what they're not supposed to do, is when they're being the most themselves because they're choosing what they think is right over what other people are telling them that they need to be doing. Yeah.
Were there any characters in Prince of Fortune who changed significantly from your original visions of how you wrote them?
Aubrey's got three older brothers, and they started out as a bit two-dimensional. I was a bit like, I'll just write it and I'll see how we go. Like, I'm sure they'll show me. But I had a vague idea of, like, I had a couple of adjectives for what I wanted them to be. And like, I was kind of like, okay, but his least favorite brother, Wilson, who is the one that is just a few years older than him, I had kind of meant for him to be like this stiff, pompous sort of young man who loved rules and authority, which makes him the opposite of Aubrey. But because he's kind of the opposite of Aubrey, and he always chooses to act the exact opposite way to Aubrey would in the exact same situation, so they ended up arguing a lot. So they kind of bicker, and it became really quite fun to put them in scenes together. And so there were scenes that I meant to give to some of his older brothers that, like, but they were just kind of a bit boring and nice. Like, it was just like the older brothers going, oh, yes, boo-hoo. Whereas if he had those scenes with his brother Wilson, they would bicker and they would, it would be much funnier and a lot more dynamic. But it made them be truer to themselves because they weren't just being sympathetic. They were trying to be honest with each other. And yeah, Wilson really surprised me on the page. I would put him in scenes and he would end up kind of, taking over. I kept on having to scale it back, because, you've got this cranky older brother who wants you to behave a certain way, and Aubrey just doesn't want to do that. So yeah, it was quite fun putting them in scenes together, but I hadn't expected that at all. Yeah.
I love that. I love when characters kind of take on their own life because I find that when I'm writing, I get surprised by certain things. Like I start one direction and then all of a sudden it kind of, rivers out and you've got all these different paths to take for it. So I think I love that happened. That's so cool. So if you could step into the shoes of one of your characters for one day, who would it be and why would you choose them?
Would absolutely love to have Edmund's magical powers. So, like, imagine, you go out, it's a grey day, you're like, oh, this is a bit depressing. You could just make it sunny. You could just make a rainbow appear, like you can go outside and go, oh, my plants aren't growing. Instant plants, like it would be really, really good. You could work out, why are these plants not growing? Oh, they need more sunlight. And you could make there be more sunlight. Like it would be great. Yeah. So I think I would enjoy that quite a lot.
Trusted. I wouldn't be able to be trusted with that power because it would never rain, I promise you. And I'm in Nova Scotia, Canada, so I would do my level best to make sure it could never snow either. So what's your favorite part of the writing process? The world building, the character development, or something else? Like, what's your favorite part?
The editing.
What?
Yeah, I hate first drafts. Editing's great because then you've got it and you can fix it. And again, I mean, that's probably left over from my experience as an editor. I was a magazine editor for a really long time, and your job is to make what you've been given perfect. And so it's much better when I've got a finished product. I'm writing a first draft for something now, and it's just, and I'm like, oh yeah, I hate this. So yeah, can't wait till it's over.
That totally shocked me. Editing. I thought everybody hated editing.
No, it's my favorite.
How do you handle moments of self-doubt or writer's block?
Self-doubt is easy, I think, because the stakes are really low. Like, I mean, if I don't finish writing, like this thing that I'm writing now, if I don't finish, it doesn't matter. Like, I'm just letting myself down. It will not affect the universe. But also, like, self-doubt's really easy to kind of prick that balloon because the only time you fail is when you give up. So you can just keep on trying and you haven't failed. So who cares? Whereas writer's block, I really struggle with. And I don't even believe in writer's block. Like we know that writer's block is just a name given for a lot of other kind of things. Like it's not this real thing. And we say it as an excuse. Oh, well, I've got writer's block. Oh, well, you can't do anything about that. That's not helpful. It's often you've just made a mistake somewhere and you need to go back and figure out where it is, or you need to make a decision. You're probably putting off making a decision. Recently, I had a recent bout of writer's block and I realized I was putting off writing a particular scene because I didn't want to upset my character. Like she was going to be so upset. Like she spends the whole time trying not to bawl her eyes out. She was going to be so devastated. And I was like, you just need to do it. Let's just do it. And partly, I also just didn't think a scene where she's that upset was going to be very interesting. So like I was actually also trying to work out the angle, like the in, and I just wasn't really there yet. But then so I'm finally over that hurdle and I'm back to being okay. But like I kind of went back and I went, like that was months. And this whole section leading up to it, I've written and written and written and written. It's about twice as long as it needs to be. I'm going to have to cut so much. And I kind of went, you were avoiding this scene. So you were just adding all this other stuff. But then I was like, okay, why did I do that? And I had a look at what was happening in my life during the period.
Yeah.
And I think I was actually quite burnt out because I was running around. Life things had completely thrown me off. Like I had a back injury. My kid was unwell. We had problems with the pets. We kept on having things break around the house. So I kept on having to organize like tradespeople to come over. And I was like, I've actually been super busy, like with annoying stuff that I don't like. And plus I was in like quite a lot of pain for parts of it. And I was like, yeah, no wonder you didn't write well. Like, let's just move on. We're fine. Like, let's just keep going. Writer's block is not real. So yeah, sometimes it's life stuff. Sometimes you need to feel you're well as well. Like if you're running on empty, you need input. Like you need to consume art to make art is something that, I've heard people say as well. So if you haven't had time to like go to an art gallery or to go to a museum or to go and see, even if you haven't had time to watch, whatever the latest TV show is that everybody's going on about, then you haven't had input. You're just drawing on the self. And if your well is empty. That leaves you with nothing. So,
right.
Yeah.
You definitely have to take the time to smell the roses a little bit, I guess. So Do you have a specific routine or anything that you do, a ritual that helps you get into the creative flow?
No, I'm a mum. I don't have the luxury of being able to do that kind of thing. I snatch an hour. I snatch a few hours. I sometimes go, my kid's doing something. I've probably got 20 minutes. I'm just going to real quick, jot this down. So no, I'm not a ritual person. I know a lot of people who do that and they get themselves in the mood, or they might light a candle or something. And so we're writing now. I just can't. So yeah.
You said that the first book took you 5 years, did you say, to write?
But that was also
Idea, conception, everything.
yeah, that was everything. That was also the publishing process, which of course takes a really long time.
Okay.
So yeah, but I am a very slow writer. I heard someone describe themselves recently. Oh, it took me a year and a half to write that. And I'm like, that would be great. That'd be great. Yeah.
So what's the most challenging scene you wrote in Prince of Fortune, if you can provide it without any spoilers?
There is a love letter it's a bit more than halfway through that I really struggled with because I really needed it to sound like the sender, but I also really needed it to be like as passionate and intense as it could be without sounding obsessive and creepy. Like I really had to there was like just a little narrow path that I needed to tread with this. And it needed to sound true to the period. And I really labored over that for a really long time. So I ended up reading a lot of poetry. I listened to a lot of love songs. And I reread all the romantic scenes in my Austen. That letter in Persuasion that Captain Wentworth writes to Anne, where it's just one of the most romantic things ever in like the history of English literature. And so I was like, okay, right, now how do I channel that? So I labored over that for a really long time. And in edits, I don't think a single word got touched. And I was like, okay, great, good, wonderful.
What a relief.
Yeah.
So how do you know when a story is ready to be shared in your opinion? Like what gave you the confidence to send it off to your first, I don't know if you made multiple attempts to get it published, but your first
I think
attempt?
it's a gut feeling. Like I was happy with it. It felt balanced and polished, and like it was the best that I could make it on my own. Like that's really all you're trying for when you're querying. You're just trying to make it the best that you can on your own, knowing that your agent's probably going to want to help you fix stuff up, and then you're in the editing process, you'll fix stuff up. But like I was like, look, this feels right. But also I had totally labored over it a lot, much like with my love letter. I labored over the whole thing. I possibly should have sent it earlier. Like I think that it's quite intimidating to then have to show it to other people. But I had like practiced that I had beta readers and critique partners and so on. And like they had given me their feedback. And so, yeah, getting used to showing your work to other people. And I found it was completely different to writing an article. I didn't care how many people were reading my articles. It was just something that, happened and you don't really think about. 'Cause you're just kind of trying to be helpful. Like you're trying to make sure that the public knows whatever this issue is. Like it's a completely different thing to bearing a piece of your soul.
Right.
Which is what I felt like I was doing. So it felt like I was ready to send it out there. Yeah. It has to be an emotional decision, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. I like that. So Prince of Fortune explores themes of destiny and choice. How do you personally relate to these ideas?
That's an interesting one because I don't believe in destiny. I don't think that things are predestined, but I also think that you can predict sometimes what's going to happen based on certain things. Like the powerful are always going to cling to power unless there are structural things in place to try and limit their power. So that's a theme that kind of gets explored a little bit. And like, I think that is something that happens everywhere. So the idea that things are fixed and you can't change them is actually a horrible idea to me. But that's not quite how the world works in Prince of Fortune. And often the country, because the government lets things that have been seen inform their policy sometimes because they know if it's been seen, it's going to happen that way. And sometimes the government's sitting there going, I wish someone would see what's going to happen so that we would know how to plan for this. And the country's prophets are like, well, don't look at us. Apparently things are still happening that can change this outcome. So no one knows. No one's had a vision. Thanks very much. You need to make decisions on your own. And so that was a tension in a lot of the book as well.
Are there any symbols or motifs in the book that have special meaning for you?
Not really. I mean, there are symbols and motifs in there. But there's no secret, that this is very deep and meaningful for me because, my late mother, loved this or whatever. That's not really there. I think I just I wrote a book that is full of things that I hope queer readers will recognize. So the book it's queer normative. There's no homophobia. There's no transphobia. There is limited sexism. There's not really racism. There is some xenophobia, but I think that it's just because I found myself not being able to get rid of it just because people from different cultures are different from you. So it's not even like they're intolerant. It's just that they're different and sometimes that causes friction. So I put all of the sort of the hierarchical things, like the way that people are treated badly, I just put all of that into the class system because then you can look at it from a different lens. But also I don't like hierarchies anyway that dehumanize certain people over others. And so that was like something that was important to me to put in there, if that helps answer the question.
Yeah. And it makes perfect sense. We could only hope to ever achieve that kind of peace in our lifetimes, but to eliminate those phobias in general would be...
I'd love to get rid of the class system as well, but anyway.
Yeah, true story. How do you approach weaving deeper themes into your story without making them feel heavy-handed?
I think my story is heavy-handed, to be perfect. So I don't think, I'm not a subtle person. I don't think I'm particularly subtle with my themes at all, and I think that sometimes you just need to present things, though. Like, there are specific things in my book that I'm not sure I was clear about why they were there. And I just hope that people realize why they're there. So there's a few uncomfortable things that the good guys do or that the good guy, like, it's just part of their culture. And like, I'm not presenting them as perfect. The culture is not perfect. I'm not presenting them as perfect. I'm not presenting these things as a good thing. And so if any times there are points where people are like, oh, why is that in there? I hope that it makes them think about why it's there. So that's about as subtle as I get, really.
Yeah. What do you hope readers will take away from the themes that you've explored in Prince of Fortune?
I hope that people will have a think about structures of power. I really do hope that they will question a few things about the way that power gets funneled into the same groups of people again and again and again. But I mean, also look, I mean, there's gory bits, there's war bits, there's horrible bits, but it is supposed to be a joyful story. Like, I wrote a book that I hoped people would be able to read for comfort and feel rejuvenated and feel better and feel like lost in the love story so that then they could be rejuvenated so that they could get on with their day. Like, I think that there is a lot of value in an escapist story where you can just escape into another world, that the problems are completely reframed so that it feels less like you're looking at the problems in your own life. And then, you feel energized and you can get on with dealing with whatever you have to deal with.
Yeah. You're back to your metaphor about filling up the well when it comes to looking at artwork and stuff. It's very much the same thing. You're hoping that your book would fill somebody else's well.
Absolutely. That is exactly what I tried to write. Yeah.
That's beautiful. So if you could invite 3 fictional characters from your book or others to dinner, who would you be having dinner with?
I'm a bit socially awkward. So this question never sounds good to me. I don't want 3 strangers around for dinner. That sounds awful.
You better pick 3 people who are happy to talk to themselves.
If I had to pick 3 people, I thought about it. Look, I think this was influenced by, we just finished watching Murderbot and Doctor Who, and I was like, I don't want to go on adventures with these people, but I'd really like to meet them. So, if I could have Doctor Who around for dinner and then not have to go on a life-threatening adventure, in the TARDIS, maybe I could look at the TARDIS and then go, this is lovely, I'm so happy I went in the TARDIS, and then leave. and not go anywhere. That would be great. And I was like, well, if Murderbot and like his Dr. Mensa were also at dinner, I'm sure they could all help each other. You know, Doctor Who would find some brilliant way to expose all of the companies and the corporate rim and everything. And that would be a really awesome dinner party. And I would have facilitated that. So like, that sounds really good. And then I also don't need to go anywhere.
Perfect mastermind work right there.
Yeah. My work is done.
What's a book or an author that you've always recommended to people?
Oh, again, I always struggle with this question because taste is so subjective, and I often don't like the really huge popular books. So like, I feel like maybe my taste is a bit quirky. If people liked my book, if they're looking for more queer YA sort of fantasy, that they don't know about because it's criminally underrated, Sarah Rees Brennan's In Other Lands is one of my absolute favorite books. It is so good. I have completely destroyed my copy. And it's sort of like a spoof of that portal fantasy magical school genre. It's hilariously funny. Like if you like a really funny book, which, you know, I like a hilariously funny book, but it also has a really satisfying romance, but it's a slow burn, which my book is not. And I love it so much. It is my comfort book. It makes me happy every time I pick it up.
Awesome. I just wrote it down because I'm curious about it. If you could live in any historical period for a week, given the fact that there is so much, like you know a great deal about history,
Yeah.
which one would you choose?
Again, I always struggle with this question as well because, like, a lot of historical periods, women are not treated well, queer people are not treated well.
Right?
So, like, I thought about it and I was like, well, look, just from a practical perspective, I'm writing something at the moment that's set in a fake 1930s, like in a fantasy 1930s. So, from a practical perspective, that would be very handy for me. But politically, yeah, there's a lot going on. I don't know. Like, I don't think I'd feel safe. As I thought about just during my lifetime where I'd like to go back to, and kind of in the middle aughts in Australia, we'd voted out our Conservative government. It was a real feeling of hope in the air after there was just a brief period after like kind of 2007. And like, we really thought the future was going to be bright. And so I think 2007 in Australia, I could really do again. So I was like, yeah, no, we thought everything was going to be great. Like, yeah, I'd like to go back then.
If Prince of Fortune was turned into a movie, what would your dream location of filming be?
Oh, anywhere, because the movie would be the dream. But I think I would also want it to look the way that I pictured it. So, look, there were a lot of English spots that like I was thinking of when I was writing it, because I mean, you need to picture the locations, and I have so many locations. That's why there's a map in the front. There's so many different places. Yeah. So there are 2 naval bases that the country has, and I did think of Portsmouth and Plymouth when I was writing those. Like, there's a whole lot of palaces from that area across Europe, but I was thinking of Buckingham Palace and Windsor Castle mostly when I pictured the main palace, Tolston Palace, which is where Edmund lives. But I mean, Versailles would also be fine. It's possibly a bit fancy if they, you know, just brought it down a bit. That would be acceptable. Yes, Versailles would be acceptable. I wouldn't mind that. So, yeah, I would like it to look like that period, and it does need to look sort of English. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
Okay. What's the most memorable piece of feedback that you've received from a reader so far? This is like one of my favorite questions.
I had someone reach out recently to let me know, because they want to ask me some questions. They wanted to let me know they were including my book as one of the texts that they were analysing for an assignment for their postgrad. So for their grad studies that they were doing in young adult literature, they were including my book. And it was the best thing I'd ever heard. Like, I didn't even know that this was on my, you know, bucket list. But I was like, oh my God, that'd be great. Yes, send me whatever questions you need clarified. Yep, I'm right here. So, no, that was awesome. That was the best thing ever.
That is awesome. Did they elaborate into what made them choose your book at all, or?
They were doing an assignment specifically, like they were doing a much broader study, but this particular assignment, they were talking about transnormative and homonormative worlds. And I was incredibly flattered to have been included because I made a transnormative world, but there's just on page, there's just one non-binary character and they're only in one scene. Like they have limited dialogue, but I had specifically included them as evidence that the world didn't discriminate.
Mm-hmm.
So like I felt like that character had done their job, like that I'd done my job in showing that this wasn't something that was an issue. And like they sent me a question saying, look, can I just confirm it? And it feels like the reason why you don't have any cis trans people on the page is just because it's so normalized it wouldn't even be something you would talk about. And I'm like, oh my God, I did my job. That is exactly why there are no, because my editor had asked me about it. And I'm like, no, you don't understand. In this world, it would just be so normal you wouldn't talk about it. Like as if you would ask in this world where it's a lot of it is a kind of a story of manners. It would be so rude to randomly be talking about someone's junk. Like there would be no way in my world that they would do it. There would be no way, particularly my two point of view characters, Edmund and Aubrey, would never. They're gentlemen. So like it just felt like in this one scene, I had done my job to the point where someone wanted to include it in works, in a work about talking about IA in Australia and how it was creating in fantasy, like an idea of what the world could be.
Yeah.
And they also included C.S. Pacat's Starcry series and Lily Wilkinson's new Unhallowed Halls. And they have very clear trans characters, but I was specifically included as a low-key example where it is just normal. It's not a big thing. There's not even a major character, but just the fact that this is running in the background, she felt was worth noting.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, this is the best thing I've ever heard. Like, hooray!
Yeah, that's incredible. I love that. That's amazing. So how do you hope to connect with your readers through your stories, events, or something else? How do you hope to connect with them?
I always feel like the words on the page should speak for themselves. But I've done a couple of events and they've been lovely. People are just lovely. And I mean, you now everyone's on social media. So I'm most active on Instagram. So like that is a good way to talk to people. But yeah, I strongly feel like the words on the page should be enough. So, that's your question?
Yeah, it does. Yeah. I just was pausing because I wasn't sure if you were going to take a breath and keep talking, and I didn't want to interrupt you. Are there any upcoming projects or ideas that you're excited to share with your fans?
I am currently writing a heroine's journey, which I'm finding a little bit like technically difficult because things need to go in certain places. And I'm like a pantser and a quilter. Like I normally write all over the shop. I'm having to write this one from start to finish because it needs to go in a certain order. But I'm really excited to do it because it's exactly the story that I felt like telling right now. And so, during, my city had a massive lockdown in 2020, and Gail Carriger released a non-fiction book about the heroine's journey during then, and I just devoured it while sitting at home, because it said a whole lot of things that I had kind of been thinking about myself, but like intuitively, and it kind of put them all on the page sensibly. And I was like, yes, as I'm reading this. And it's really accessible. Often when I tried to get my head around the heroine's journey before, there's a few books about it. And some of them, they go on about Jungian psychology a lot, which I'm not a huge fan of. And they treat it as though it is just a variation on the hero's journey when the themes are completely different. And so like in the hero's journey, you know, you've got the immature hero and he says no to the call of adventure and, you know, he has to be dragged into it. And in the heroine's journey, you usually start off with the heroine having lost something and she sets off on her own because she doesn't feel like she has any other choice. She goes for that, you know, like, and she's trying to drag other people with her. And it feels like it's a structure that's having like a moment right now. So Disney's Encanto, if you've seen that, is a heroine's journey. I was sitting there in the cinema and I think I annoyed my child because I'm like, and they're like, shush, mummy. But they had also just done, what was it called? Raya and the Last Dragon, which is also one, that TV show Fallout that's just been on. And I mean, I think that because that was influenced by the Wizard of Oz, the old movie, not the book. So I think that because it was influenced by that, yeah, that's a heroine's journey, because the Wizard of Oz is a heroine's journey. She loses her home, even though she brings her home with her. She loses Kansas and her family,
Yes.
and she meets people along the way so they can all help each other. So there's a lot of community building. There's a lot of, well, we need to go fix this. Like, I've got a problem that needs to be fixed, and people are trying to hinder her. And she's like, well, I'm really scared, but I've got to do it anyway because I need to fix this.
Yeah, exactly.
And so, and at the end of the heroine's journey, the heroine, instead of having to go off into the sunset covered in glory but alone because, you know, manly, the heroine, and I mean, the heroine can be a man, but in like the heroine's journey, she is reinstated in her place, and her community is often strengthened by whatever journey she's gone through, and she is in her community. She is safe. Everyone is safe. And there's there's a happy ending. So romances are lover, they borrow a lot from the heroine's journey. And Gail Carriger has a background in archaeology, so she traced it back to our earliest sort of stories. So like she kind of went, we've had this the whole time, just like we've had the hero's journey, but it just kind of gets ignored because in our culture, like the macho tends to be prioritized just because, misogyny. But it's there in the descent of Ishtar into the underworld. It's there in that story. It's there in the hymn to Demeter. Oh, there was another one. The story of Osiris and Isis. Osiris gets chopped up into pieces and Isis needs to go and find the pieces of her husband. And yeah, the recent Barbie movie, there was a great article about how that is essentially a retelling of the story of Ishtar and her descent into the underworld, because she is a queen and something happens and she starts thinking about death and she wants to know about death and she goes into the underworld. And I was like, I can't believe that I didn't see it as I was watching this film. It is very much, it is such a, and because I'd watched the film and I was like, Heron's Journey, but I hadn't seen how similar it was to The Descent of Ishtar. So I was just delighted when I read this article, especially since, again, it felt like other people are noticing as well, that this is
somebody
happening.
else seeing it that way.
So look, I'm super excited about it. And if anyone's interested in that book, it's very chatty and accessible because it's based on apparently a seminar that she sometimes presents. But yeah, it was exactly what I needed to read at the time. Yeah.
Nice. So finally, what's the one thing you'd like readers to know about The Prince of Fortune before they dive in?
Prince of Fortune is a queer, romantic fantasy novel about two young men who really just want to be in love, but like there's all this other stuff happening. So there are gory bits, there's a lot of politics. It's not all rainbows, I'm sorry. And I designed it to be a story that would make people feel better. So I hope it does. Yeah, like I hope I succeeded there.
That's awesome. It's a beautiful thought to have, like, to set out to write something to make people happy, because, a lot of the writing can handle some darker themes or things like that. And maybe it's not necessarily intended specifically to make one happy. You know what I mean? It's to tell a story or whatever. So I love that it is your origin, that you wanted to invoke happiness. So thank you so much for sitting down and talking with me tonight and explaining this, because this is a fantastic story and it needs to be told. I think that's amazing. And I'm very excited to read it now. Like, I had read through some of your reviews and tried to get a feel for it before we got the opportunity to talk. But you've definitely sold me on it. I think that's an incredible premise and one that needs to be real in some regards. So thank you so much for sharing and for spending your evening with me, or your morning.
Thank you. Well, it's my morning. Yeah, I'm starting my day. What a great way to start the day. Thank you so much for having me on. This has been a pleasure.
Awesome. And what is the best way? You said Instagram is where you're most active, where
I'm most
people can
active
get a hold of you?
on there, yeah, but I'm in a few places. Look, I've also just launched a Substack. I haven't even sent out the first one yet. I had to leave MailChimp, so I'm about to do my first Substack in a couple of weeks.
Awesome.
But people get a free short story as well when they sign up. So, and I love that short story. I love it so much. So I hope other people do too.
Is your short story related to your future book or your previous one?
No, it is just completely separate. Yep.
Short story. And so this is when you say Substack, I'm not familiar with that term.
It's a newsletter.
Newsletter. Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
I just wanted to clarify just in case if anybody else was not familiar with
No,
that. It might just be
I
me.
have had a newsletter for a while. I've had to change where it's platformed. And so many writers that I know are all on Substack. So I went, okay, I give in. I give up. I'll do a Substack. Fine, whatever.
Awesome. All right. So thank you so much again. And hopefully people can find those books everywhere, Amazon, bookstores.
Yes, absolutely. So it was released in the US and in Canada last October. It was released in Australia this January. Everywhere it is available in ebook and in audio, but it doesn't hit shelves in the UK until this November. So it's been a bit drawn out, but yeah, no, it is available for pre-order for sort of the UK now.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.